Hey, everybody. How y'all doing? Mom, let her read her book. Let her read the book, Ram. I tell you, there's a beautiful young child down here, looks to be about 16, I think 6 maybe. 7, 8, how old are you? Oh, 7 years old, yeah. Well, honey, you are so, please all have a seat. You are so good to be here. Somebody owes you a big surprise for having to sit through all of this. And it's okay by me if you read your book while I'm speaking, okay? It really is. You're such a good girl. Hey, everybody, how y'all doing? Nice to see you. Welcome to Washington. Now you all know, I know a lot of you are from Washington, but I'm told some of you are from out of town. Now you know why I was told, I think this is true, I was told that back in the 20s and 30s, and actually earlier than that, any diplomat representing Great Britain in Washington, D.C. got tropical duty pay. You understand why that's the case now, but although the places you came from, those of you who came into town, probably almost as hot as we are here, and so, but I thank you all for being here. Let me start by quoting my dad, a phrase my dad used to always use. Whenever you'd say something, someone would say, well, this is what I value, this is what I support, this, my dad would go like this. He'd say, look, don't tell me what you value. Show me your budget, and I will tell you what you value. Seriously. Show me your budget, and I will tell you what you value. Don't tell me you value women in your office space, in your corporation, if you have a budget where you don't have any women that are being paid like men. Don't tell me that you value and are deeply concerned about seniors if, in fact, you eviscerate the things that you know they rely on, not only for their well-being, but I'll return to this, for their dignity and their pride. Rock bottom, where Joe Biden starts, I come at retirement security from a different angle than it's usually discussed in this town or anywhere for that matter. I had the great privilege, like many of you, of having my mom and dad live with me in their last years. My dad would only move in with my mom when hospice was necessary. And it turned out, God love him, he beat the odds, which he always did, and instead of being 6 weeks, it was 5 months. And I had the great pleasure, like all of you, and like every child who wants to take care of his parents, of being able to kiss him good morning every morning and kiss him good night when I came home. My mom, after that, moved out. She insisted she was going to stay in her home because we always had a parent, an uncle, an aunt, someone living with us the entire time, but for 3 years that I was in my parents' household from the time I was born. She said she never wanted to do that. Finally, we convinced Mom to come and move on to where we live. And she lived for a number of years, until age 92. The reason I mention that to you, you all understand better than most people in this town understand, that this is about more. This is about more than just whether or not there's going to be the financial wherewithal to care for people. Obviously, that's the core of the debate. But about preserving their dignity, preserving their pride, preserving their sense of being able to care for themselves, even if a little bit of it's a fiction, for as long as they can. Because they know something you know that, again, we don't talk about. They know there's very few children out there and grandchildren who, if their Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security were to be cut, that those children won't step in and fill the void. And they know what a burden that is in their children, that sandwich generation, trying to help mom and dad, trying to take care of their kids in the middle of this god-awful recession that we inherited. So I view this, I come at this from a very different place. Doesn't mean I'm right or wrong, but I just view it differently. I view this as a family affair. I really mean that. I view this as a family affair. And quite frankly, I resent when I see on television, usually the other team, but every once in a while someone on our team, not in the White House, but a Democrat, will say something like, well, we have to cut it to preserve it for the other generation. There's a tendency, I'm not even sure it's intended, to pit one generation against the next. That's bizarre. I don't know anybody I grew up with in my neighborhood who isn't going to do whatever it takes to make sure their mom has their prescription drugs. I don't know anybody. I don't know anybody in my neighborhood that I grew up that isn't going to do all they can to make sure mom has a place to live, no matter how much pressure it puts on my children or your grandchildren. Do you guys know any people like that? I don't. I don't know these guys who sit there, young people, and say, hey, you know, let's cut it now so we're going to have it. So I want to be upfront with you all. I view this literally as a family affair. I view this as a value set. I view this as about people's dignity. People who built this country. People who gave us everything we have. My siblings and I, as I said, we couldn't separate the security from my mom and dad from our own well-being, and we were well off. You pay me a lot of money as Vice President of the United States. As the President said when we had our first meeting a couple weeks after we were all sworn in, he thanked everybody for the sacrifices they made. Then he looked and caught my eye and he said, except Joe, he got a pay raise. And I have successful brothers and sisters. And it still was a stretch. I don't know how people do it. I don't know how they do it. But tell you what, no matter what their income, they'll try to do it. I think that what's really missing in this whole debate is that we really are in this together. I don't see any automatic separation based on generations. So there's no question, to state the obvious, that there are new pressures on Medicare and Social Security, and they're real. We can't play a game that these aren't real. The question, in my view, as Vice President of the United States and getting to be the last guy in the room with the President, and I can say the President shares my view or I share his view on this, this is where I can speak for him without worry that there's any space between what I'm saying to you and what he believes in his gut. See, I trust it most when it starts in your gut and goes to your heart, and then is articulated by your intellect. They're the guys, they're the women who don't change their minds under pressure if it starts here. With my president, with your president, it starts here in his gut, and it goes to here. So the question is, what are we going to do to strengthen and sustain these programs now and for the future? Question also is, are we going to let others use this challenge, and it's a real challenge, as a pretense to dismantle these programs? I was speaking about a year ago in Florida to a group, and I pointed something out. It's not accidental that the other team, from the beginning, on every one of these issues, has been either, yeah, me too, or, but not as much, or we shouldn't have done it in the first place. Let's just be, look, when you get to be our age, and I know a lot of you are a lot younger, you can smell it. You don't have to wonder. All of a sudden, the guy who has been against Social Security or against or wanting to make massive changes, or not happy about Medicare in the first place, or not thinking Medicaid, they think it's too much of a burden, and all of a sudden they get religion and tell you how they're going to save it for you? Whoa, this is not our first rodeo. Take Medicare. No matter what the other side says, we know we can fix Medicare without gutting it. We've already started it. In our health care law, we extended the life of Medicare by 8 years until 2024. Not nearly enough. What do? We ask hospitals to take steps to help ensure that seniors who leave a hospital don't come back, don't have to come back. You know the studies. I'm preaching to the choir here. By fundamental changes in the way hospital care is delivered, without fundamentally altering the cost of delivery of that care, actually saving it, hundreds of millions and over time billions of dollars can be saved. We cut $100 billion in payments to insurance companies that independent studies said were excessive. We stepped our efforts against fraud. And we've already, since the effort's begun, in earnest, have recovered $10 billion. I won't bore you with more of the details, but there's a whole lot more we can do, and there are more ideas. Right now, for example, drug companies give discounts on drugs for people on Medicaid. We've been pushing and going to continue to push the ability to save $100 billion just by getting drug companies to give those discounts to just the most vulnerable of the seniors on Medicare, the so-called dual eligibles. But we need real partners. We need real partners on the other side to get it done. I've been here a long time. I was a senator I got elected when I was 29 years old in the Senate. I was elected 7 times in the Senate and vice president. I've never quite seen it this way before, where the obstruction is so endemic in terms of the process. But we're prepared to sit down and work out with our Republican friends, which I started to do, as you remember, that Biden committee where we met for 40 hours with the leaders, appointed leaders by the House leaders and Senate leaders, Democrat and Republican. There's nothing easy about it, but there are solutions that can save the programs. But we need to start from the premise that Medicare, as we know it, is preserved. That's the premise we're not prepared to yield on. Unfortunately, the other side has staked out a very different position. And by the way, these are decent, honorable men and women. I'm not playing the game, these guys are bad guys. They just have a different value set as to what is the most important thing that we should be doing. Just look at Congressman Ryan, a bright, bright guy, an honorable man. His budget, which has been embraced by, I believe, every member in the Republican side in the House of Representatives. You might remember the first Ryan budget last year. There was nothing subtle about it. It dismantled Medicare and would have turned it into a voucher program over a 10-year period. The independent report found that out-of-pocket health care costs for the typical 65-year-old would have doubled. That's $6,400 a year more than being paid now. Again, my mom and dad had 4 kids who could help. But that's all my mom and dad had. They had my dad worked his whole life. Pension did not exist. Social Security and Medicare and putting 4 kids through college and graduate school were the legacies. Another $650 matters. You also probably remember that this plan was overwhelmingly rejected by the American people. It passed, every House member voted for it. Didn't get through the Senate, and you all started talking about it. And the public overwhelmingly rejected it. You say, well, how do you know that, Biden? Well, they didn't come back with the same plan this year. They got a new one. This year they came back with one that's more subtle, but it really didn't change. It didn't change the core of what they want to do. They're still pushing Medicare vouchers. It's a plan that would still mean higher cost for almost everyone who depends on Medicare. And that goes for Medicaid too. Folks, you know how important this program is to seniors. Medicaid pays 40% of the long-term care spending in this country, not only by bringing peace of mind to seniors, but to their children and grandchildren as well, who otherwise would have the burden. And if I could digress for just 1 second here. The vast majority of folks in long-term care are women. And the overwhelming majority depend on and are there only because of Medicare. And it helps about 5 million seniors who can't cover their Medicare premiums or cost sharing on their own to get the health care they need. House Republicans propose cutting the funding by more than a third, taking 19 million Americans on Medicare off the rolls. 19 million. Why? Because they have other priorities. And they really believe if these other priorities are promoted, the whole economy and everything will be better and everything will grow. I'm not sure how it's going to help seniors immediately, but that's the thesis. And what's it based upon? Well, it starts off with insisting on extending the tax cut for people, not just, but primarily for people making over $1 million. It cost $800 billion to keep the Bush tax cut, just for people making over $1 million. I want to put this in perspective. Of the total $1 trillion cost of the entire Bush tax cut for people making over $250, you know how much of that goes to 120,000 families in America? $550 billion to 120 families. Let me say this again. Maintaining the top-tier tax cut cost over 10 years $1 trillion. Maintaining for just people making $1 million or more cost $800 billion of that. Maintaining it for people with an average income of $8.4 million a year, which comes out to be 120,000 families in America, cost $550 billion over the next 10 years. That's a fact. They've made a clear choice. Lower the standard of living for those on Medicare and Medicaid, rather than ask anything of the wealthiest among us. And by the way, I come from a wealthy state of Delaware. I think it has the highest per capita income still. The wealthy in my state are as patriotic and as caring as the poor. I've never seen any distinction between patriotism or generosity coming from a poor folk and a wealthy guy. But we're not asking anything of them. They're the only group in this entire recession we've not asked anything of. We launched 2 wars, one necessary and one not necessary. And on the way, at the same time, gave a multi-trillion-dollar tax cut over that period of time. I don't get it. And on top of maintaining the Bush tax cut, and we want to maintain it for middle-class people, on top of that, and on top of what it will do to all the other benefits that seniors have that they want to undo, the House Republicans voted to repeal the health care law last week. Let's not forget what that means, what they voted against. But let me go back to taxes for just a second. There is the $800 billion that's set aside over here for people with $1 million or more. Of that, $550 billion to 120,000 families. In addition, Paul Ryan introduced a new budget, which calls for an additional $2 trillion in tax cuts, almost $2 trillion in tax cuts over the next 10 years for people who make a minimum of $1 million. So over the next 10 years, we're going to spend roughly $2.8 trillion on people who make over $1 million because their tax burden apparently is too high. So you wonder, how could these guys come out with a Ryan budget? I mean, it doesn't seem logical, does it? Well, they're honest guys to this extent. They've got to. They've got to eviscerate everything else to come up with another $2.8 trillion. And with the health care law that they voted to repeal, our health care law closed the donut hole for 5.3 million individuals. Medicare in the Medicare donut hole, saving those folks, those 5.3 million, $600 a year already on their prescription drugs. And our health care law provides more preventative services, checkups, bone mass measurements, mammograms, which you now got to pay for. You've had to pay for, but no copay. We want to keep you healthy. It makes sense long term. It costs the government less money to make sure you go in when you feel something, when you have something you're worried about, and get it taken care of front end than it does waiting till it happens. They want to repeal all that. Folks, we'd be much better off if we spent a lot less energy fighting off efforts to dismantle Medicare, Medicaid, get rid of the Affordable Health Care Act, and more time working to figure out how to provide better health for the American people and preserve Medicare and Medicaid. We'll all have to make tough decisions to do that. But look, they have the same deal on Social Security. Doesn't affect y'all. They're going to come back and they do the generation thing in reverse this time. They say, oh, don't worry, we're not going to affect anybody on Medicare now, on Social Security. And they're right. They're not going to do that. But guess what they do? They got this great idea. Republicans have come up with another approach for Social Security that they claim saves Social Security, solely, though, by cutting benefits. What do? What they do is they say, somebody who is now 42 years old or 45 years old, we're going to cut your Social Security. So when it comes time for you to get it, you ain't getting anything like your parents got. That's how they're going to save it. So I love how they do this shell on the pea game. Don't worry, you should not worry about it. You should be for these changes in Social Security. It's going to preserve you, but it's going to really nail your kids. I'm serious. That's the reality. I know I have a bad reputation of speaking plainly. I'm going to continue to speak plainly. It's served me well my whole life. I don't like people who don't speak plainly to me. I don't understand. Actually, I do understand them. So, folks, we can resolve the challenges of Social Security, and we can do it in good faith. I did it before. I was part of a relatively small group back in 1983 as a U.S. Senator that extended the life of Social Security well into the 20th century, the 21st century. Social Security was about to run out of money. So we sat down, we worked with Republican leaders, real leaders, Bob Dole, my colleague from Delaware, conservative as can be, but a great friend, Bill Roth, chairman of the Finance Committee, Ronald Reagan, Tip O'Neill, Pat Moynihan. And we literally sat down together and separately in smaller groups. And we made what was a difficult decision. People didn't like it. No one wants any change. We said gradually, months over years, you're not going to be able to retire at 65. Very, 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 very unpopular decision. Nobody wanted to change it, except we knew it had to be done. So what did? We joined hands. Never forget what Bob Dole said after getting up from a meeting. He said he had a great sense of humor. He still does. And he said, we all got to get out. He stood up in his chair, and we all got to get up and put one foot together in a rowboat at the same time. And then all together put 2 feet in so it doesn't tip. So we're all in the boat together. Getting in that boat together with leaders like Reagan and O'Neill, what did we do? We preserved the system. Preserve the system. Again, this conversation we're having here, nobody's saying there are easy answers to this. And any of you who go, oh, there's no problem, just keep everything away, you're wrong. You're wrong. But there are solutions. And democracy solutions come when people of good faith wanting to resolve and save a specific thing make hard decisions. But when one team says let's preserve it and the other team says let's basically get rid of it, do something different, there's not much room to compromise. Look, folks, you know in your gut what I know. It's about putting politics against, it's about putting the country and the seniors against your political interest. Just for a moment, to preserve one of the most significant government initiatives in the history of the United States of America. And that's what we need today. That's what's missing this time. Today, our Republican friends are fixated on one thing, additional tax cuts for the wealthy. They won't budge an inch on this. They have a very different value set than we do. As I said, my father used to say, don't tell me what you value, show me your budget, and I'll tell you what you value. And what they value is different than what my team values. That's not to say they don't care about the elderly. I believe they do. They just have a different way. But it's always basically been this way. They've never initiated any of these changes we're trying to preserve. Folks, it's simple math. You either preserve Medicare and Medicaid, fix Social Security, and draw down the deficit, or you spend another several $1 trillion in tax cuts for the wealthy, and you make more room for another $2 trillion tax cut proposed by Congressman Ryan and his Republican colleagues. But you can't do both. You can't do both now. And the President and I refuse to shift the burden, particularly of this god-awful recession we have, on the backs of the people who work so darn hard their whole life, who earned their retirement, and had nothing to do with this collapse that we inherited of the economy. Nothing. But now the other side argues that cutting is the only way to save the programs for the next generation. As I said, they just don't understand. They just don't understand that retirement is multi-generational. As I said, it matters to you, it matters to your children, it matters to your grandchildren. Because if you don't go, they won't step. I'll tell you one story in conclusion. My mom was a very proud lady. And my mom, God love her, was in great health to close to the very end. And my mom moved in with us, and she actually moved in. There was a piece of property I bought and built a house, and it had a little tiny barn on it. I mean, it was like a big garage. And it was at the top of the driveway, and my brother would say, gingerbreaded it up. I put nicer doors on it and put, shutters on the windows so it didn't look like an old dilapidated barn when you walked in. I couldn't get my mom to move in with us, even though the whole downstairs I built for my mom and dad, it was a walkout, it was glass, looked out on a nice view, and she wouldn't move in. Particularly after my dad died there, she just wasn't going to do that. So one day we're driving down the driveway at Christmas time. I said, Joey, I'm a frustrated architect. She said, build me a house there, a cottage. I said, Mom, I don't have any money to build a cottage, honey. I built the house for you. She said, no. She said, sell my house and you go ahead and build a house right there for me. Little cottage. The humorous part was, by the way, I designed this great little cottage. It had 1 bedroom, and so I had the architect come in with me, and I laid it out on the dining room table. She said, it only has 1 bedroom, Joey. I said, well, honey, is there something you want to tell me about? I don't know. She said, no, Joey. She said, when my grandchildren, great-grandchildren, I want them staying with us. I said, Mom, it's 500 feet to the house. I got 5 bedrooms. She said, Joey, they're not my bedrooms. The generic point is my mom drove until the very end. And so she used to go up to what used to be called Happy Harry's. It's a chain of drugstores in Delaware. Now it's Walgreens. And so my sister suspected that Mom wasn't, and do you know anybody who's a senior that doesn't have, especially an octogenarian over 85, who doesn't have 6, 7, 8 prescriptions they take? And for a child, one of the hardest things to do is literally get it right and make sure you have it, you know. And so my sister Valerie is smarter than I am. She said, Joey, I don't think Mom's getting all her prescriptions. So I followed her up one day. This is before I got elected and they didn't have the Secret Service take me. I followed her up. It's only about 1.5 miles. And I went to Happy Harry's, and there's a blood pressure machine. There's aisles and a blood pressure machine at the end. So I sort of hid behind the blood pressure machine because people lined up to get their prescriptions at the window, you know, the pickup window. And there's a beautiful lady, beautiful personality who's the druggist there. And what happened is my mom went up and she got like a deck of cards, with chips handed to her, all these prescriptions. And she very politely said, oh, I don't need this one, honey. I don't need this one. My mother was ashamed to tell me. I could easily afford it. My sister could easily afford it. My brothers could easily afford it, and we all did. But Mom was too proud. Too proud to say, I'm short getting this prescription. That's why this country's so great. Because people with pride and dignity like my mother. That's what made this country. And the idea at the end of their lives, we're going to do this, is beyond my comprehension. We need your help. You all have impact in your communities. You're parts of large organizations and some not so large. But please go out. As they say, as I say, speak plainly. Speak plainly to the people you know. You influence people. They respect you. It's not just the organization. You wouldn't be here if you weren't leaders. We've got to go out and make this a fight. Some things are worth fighting for, folks. And this is worth fighting for. God love you all. Thank you very, very much. May God protect our troops. Thank you.